guys, this is Pastor Casey coming back with another question and answer video, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of should I discipline my children, etc. We're going to be talking about this and trying to, of course, take a biblical perspective as to what not only the Bible expects, but I believe in terms of overall thinking through what exactly society looks like. Discipline, I believe, takes a very strong, prominent role within even society. And so thinking about that as it pops up on your screen there, I just want to be aware of types of discipline. This is not a concise list, but just some of the things that kind of came through my mind as I was praying and thinking about everything. So I think typically one of the first things that whenever you think of discipline, you think of like capital punishment or something of that kind of nature. But in terms of corporal punishment within the family, you're thinking of spanking. You're thinking of a form of grounding. Physical punishment, writing phrases. I will not, pick a phrase basically. Extra chores around the house, loss of games, different foods for lunch and dinner, or potentially for older teens, take the keys or the money away for the weekend. And so thinking through some of these different things, of course, I'd be willing to say, spanking, of course, is that corporal punishment against your child. Grounding, whether it's for a day, a week, a month. I'll admit, for one time at one point in my life, I was grounded for 18 weeks because of grades in elementary school. So that can go into it. Physical punishment, I don't mean that in terms of spanking, but, in terms of doing like wall squats or, push-ups or sit-ups or, being able to do, running a lap around the house, different things like that. Whenever it comes to different foods for lunch and dinner, that was one that I would say I know of people that have done that side of it to where it's not that the child would not eat or be fed or anything like that, but if everybody else, let's say, was having spaghetti for dinner, that they would make, if there was a disciplinary action that went into effect, that child would be given like a peanut butter sandwich or, cereal or something different. Maybe if there was a dessert, they wouldn't receive the dessert that maybe everybody else got to have. That was considered that form of punishment. And so whenever we begin to discuss and look at types of discipline, those things begin to, of course, I would say from a Christian's perspective, we got to go back to what exactly Scripture says, okay? So Bible verses that I would encourage you to think about or look to, Proverbs chapter 13 verse 24 says, "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly." So from the biblical wisdom of Solomon, we see this side of he who spares his rod hates his son. He who, and a lot of people, they take different approaches to this, okay? And so I want us to be clear on something. Whenever you say, or whenever the biblical mandate or Scripture says rod, of course it means like a staff rod that is of a shepherd. We'll see an example out of Psalm 23 here in a second. But overall, the question kind of not only becomes spares his rod, what is the rod, but we need to focus as well on he who loves him disciplines him promptly. So there is that side of it that says that there is two natures within this that we have to think through, okay? So what is rod and what is discipline? So there is a biblical mandate, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. So the method is what becomes the rod, okay? But there is still the command to say that there is a disciplinary action that should go into misbehavior or whatever the case is, okay? So that will be a circumstantial thing that we'll look at in a second. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 6 through 11. This isn't all of it, of course, but it's just kind of a glimpse of what exactly we're trying to come to an agreement on here. It says in verse 6 there, God chastens those whom He loves. That means God disciplines. That's an older English word that means discipline, okay, is what we're looking at. So God chastens or disciplines those whom He loves. So if you are a Christian and you've ever been under conviction, that is a form of God's discipline. It is God letting us know, I am unhappy, I am not pleased with your decisions. There may be other things spiritually that may take place that maybe you don't hear from God as quickly because of the fact that you've not repented from it. There are disciplinary actions that even God places over certain things within our hearts and our lives. But in verse 11, I want to jump down to that last part. It says, Now no chastening seems to be joyful in the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those whom have been trained by it. So even the author of Hebrews is affirming that God chastens Christians, those whom He loves. But as well, in that whole entire passage, it even talks about how fathers, they discipline their kids with the understanding of what they believe is appropriate in the moment, what they believe is best suited for that certain circumstance or whatever is happening and going on. So from that biblical side of it, you're starting to see there is a clear picture as to what that disciplinary side looks like. It may be spanking, it may not be spanking. We'll go over that in just a second, but there is some disciplinary action that needs to take place in the overall grand scheme of things. I mean, I would have to say, even for me, growing up, I believe my parents had to invent different ways to reprimand me because of the fact of my childhood. But still yet, I think that it, honestly, if you want my own personal opinion, it is this. I believe that it helped me to become the man that I am today. Oftentimes I will say that whenever I look at the current status of our country and I see what it looks like for up and coming generations, I think there is a lack of discipline that falls into our country right now. We've got many things known as gentle parenting and all kinds of things. I'll discuss that more in just a second, but I think that because of a lack of discipline, it produces, not in everyone, hear me out on this, but in a lot of cases, it produces the side of where people are spoiled or entitled, and there is this portion of selfishness that comes out in their life that everybody has to bow down to them, that I think comes as a result of lack of discipline. And so there is definitely, I believe, a very strong proponent of discipline as it relates to just the way society and culture functions. And there again, from a biblical mandate, there was to be a disciplinary role that took place. Even Ecclesiastes, I don't have it in the Bible verses here, but just one that comes to my mind. Ecclesiastes, I believe it's chapter 8, verse 11, or somewhere right through there, it talks about how whenever we do not enact punishment immediately, it causes things to get worse. And so it's one of those things that I believe whenever we think about how we prolong things or how we handle things, it comes with its own consequence. It has its own seriousness that falls within the culpability of all those things. Proverbs chapter 23, verses 13 and 14, it says, Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. So on that side of it, from Proverbs 23, it is pretty plain and clear, it seems. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod. Now, there again, was Solomon saying going out and beating him to the point of death? That's not what he was saying. There is a very fine line between discipline and abuse. Okay, we have to realize that discipline versus abuse, they're two very different things. But as a parent, and hear me out on this, this is where you have to be the one that determines where that line is drawn in the sand. You have to be the one that looks and says, okay, what is necessary without crossing the line to where it is to the point of where it is becoming verbal abuse or physical abuse. There is a very fine line within those things. But yet, even Solomon, he declares, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Let me tell you this, parents, whenever it comes to your children, discipline is not going to kill your children. If I've survived, you definitely will be okay. But the reality is, so often, we are in a mental health crisis period of time to where everybody says, oh, well, if they grow up and they're spanked or if they're told negative things, it's going to affect their generation or it's going to affect their mind as they're growing up. I would easily say abuse 100% will. Discipline 100% no, if it is done correctly. You know, we have to come to that place of where we are trying to get away from entitlement. We are trying to get away from selfishness. That is who we ought to be. And so there again, Solomon affirms, he will not die. The child will not die if you are going to discipline them. But what does he say after that? You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. So Solomon is making it clear. Discipline is accomplishing something. It is producing something within that child's life. There is a point of respect that they are gaining. That is one of the things that I believe many families of today's culture and society is lacking, is a respect for what exactly, whether it be for elders or other people, there's a very, I believe, line drawn in the sand as to what exactly respect looks like today. And I hate to say this, but it's found all over the place. There's a, what's the saying? There is a soapbox that I could get onto, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of the video, okay? But either way, Solomon is making it known you will deliver his soul from hell. You are growing him. You are teaching them in the admonition of the Lord, because it is biblical in that way. But you as a parent, hopefully as a Christian parent, that is what you are doing for them, is you are instructing them in the ways of the Lord, and you are teaching them to come back to God. That is the sole focus to what Solomon is after, is to discipline them, leading them back to God, because ultimately that is how it's going to change, to deliver their soul from hell. You are teaching them, you are growing them up in the admonition of the Lord. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they get old they will not depart from it. That is the biblical model, that is the biblical intention, is to be able to teach that child, to show them, to teach them what it means to come back to God. Psalm 23 verse 4, at the very end of verse 4 there, it says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So what is discipline? What is it supposed to be? Yes, from a shepherd's standpoint, to a flock of sheep, even as God is the good shepherd to Christians. What exactly does the rod symbolize? What does it stand for? It means it's a sign of provision, but it's also a sign of discipline. It's a sign of being able to take care of what the sheep are experiencing, what they are going through. It is there to lead them and guide them. And so that rod and that staff is a way of saying whatever discipline it is, it's an upbringing, it's a way of life, it is a discipline, it is something that is guiding them, leading them as a provision into the future. But what does it say? They comfort me. Going back to the Hebrews passage there in verse 11. Yeah, it's not going to be joyful. Whenever I was grounded for 18 weeks because of my grades in 4th grade, yeah, that was not fun. I didn't have TV. I didn't get to do a lot of the extracurricular things, but there again, it was a punishment. And I would even preface all that by saying, it wasn't that was just the extreme of, oh, hey, we're just going to ground you for 18 weeks. No, there had been multiple times to which they had tried to discipline me. It did not work, and so the 18-week side of it was the end result, okay? It wasn't the beginning, it was the end. But still yet, it was awful, it was miserable, it was not fun, but yet what has happened? As an older adult, I look back on those moments and I say, I needed those things. There are a lot of people that I believe need the disciplines that way. They're hopefully, I don't want to say like me, but they're looking back saying, yeah, I'm glad my parents whipped me. I'm glad my parents disciplined me because I needed it. I needed that correction. There are a lot of things that we need to do today that is biblical, but that is mandated and commanded so that way kids are growing up. Of course, the goal is to be a Christian. Now, I don't want to deviate from that side of it, but even just to be, a productive member of society. That is what we are ultimately after, or not necessarily ultimately, but that is one aspect of which we're after as just parents in general, but especially as Christian parents. Okay, so let's talk about appropriate times to discipline. So let's talk about, and this is all over the board, of course, there's many different facets as to how exactly all these things take place, okay? But being deliberately defiant, that I would say that is a point of discipline. You'll see here in a second it's based on circumstances, but overall, being deliberately defiant. If you have to say something multiple times, I would say that is definitely a point of where disciplinary action needs to be pursued. It needs to be considered. If a child or even a teenager is being disrespectful, I 100% believe there needs to be disciplinary action that results in that. There again, this isn't Casey's opinion. This is the biblical mandate. And if God's word says it, I'm just crazy enough to believe that it's going to work and it's going to help. But that's me. If they are in an unsafe environment, if they are doing things, or if a child is doing something or is somewhere that they don't need to be, they need to be removed out of that. They need to be disciplined if they keep going back to a cleaning closet or something like that. If a child is going to a friend's house that that they're going to keep drinking or there's going to be drugs, or the child needs to be removed from that. They need to be disciplined from that. It's going against the parents' orders and authority in that moment. And I would also say, and while this does not fit into everybody's category, I would say that when they are younger, it is easier. You are establishing a baseline from whenever they are younger, that as they get older, there is an expectation that comes into play. So appropriate times to discipline, which also means there are inappropriate times to discipline. If the child has an accident, if they're carrying their plate of food and they drop it, that ain't the time to spank them, because of the fact that they dropped their plate. Or if there was an accident, maybe they, use the bathroom in the bed or different things there. Again, that's kind of a younger child side of it. But if the child has an accident, that's one thing. Even as a teenager, let's say, I don't know the statistic right off the top of my head, but there's a statistic that says that most teenagers will get into their first car accident within the first, I think it's 6 months of their driving. That's probably not the best time to, as a parent, well, you wrecked the car, I'm going to, spank you, I'm going to ground you for the rest of your life, whatever else. Like, there has to be grace and mercy within these things, but there is also that circumstantial side of it that we have to be aware of, I believe, as parents in the long run, too. Here's another thing, inappropriate times to discipline. Now, parents, you're probably not going to like what I'm about to say. You're not going to agree with what I have to say, and that's fine. But here's the reality, okay? Whenever it comes to a child, what are they? They are a reflection of the parent, okay? So in that moment, here's the statement: inappropriate times to discipline when you are in the wrong as a parent, okay? Here's the funny thing. All of us we know these idioms and colloquialisms and all these different things that say, do as I say and not as I do. Parents, that has got to stop. For instance, whenever it comes to those things, children are going to mimic what they see. If they see us doing it, they are going to do it. If the child sees you using foul language, guess what? That child is probably going to use foul language. If they see you drinking and drugs and all these different things, there's a higher probability that they are going to fall into those things. But yeah, while some things, yes, they're legal versus illegal and different things, holistically, I want you to stop and think about what exactly that is going to produce. If the child sees it out of you, what can we expect? So oftentimes, there again, you may not agree with me, but it comes down to your decisions as a parent that ultimately take effect over the life of the child. And so when you are in the wrong, what are the children going to see? They're going to see hypocrisy. Well, dad can do it. Mom can do it. Why can't I do it? They're going to see that biblical model fade away, and instead of getting a godly representation, you're giving them a worldly representation. So that is one side of being an inappropriate time to discipline, I believe. When the kid is being a kid. You know, the kids are going to be loud, they're going to scream, they're going to hoop and holler. We know that there's all kinds of different avenues to which kids are just going to be kids. You know, even for teenagers, I can look back on moments and where I can say I felt I knew more than my mom and my dad. You know, ultimately that was a perception that a lot of people, I believe, carry. But still yet, there has to be grace and mercy whenever it shows a misunderstanding or the ability to not look at the logical common sense or the full reality of life, because there's things that obviously, even as a young parent myself with 4 kids under the age of 10, it's one of those things. Am I going to get it right every time? No, I know that and I admit that. But whenever it comes to these things, there are going to be moments that they're just not going to understand. They're not going to be able to comprehend what is going on. And that does not mean that I should discipline them because they don't understand. Now, if I've told them multiple times and they don't, they're not picking up what I'm putting down, that's a little different. But there has to be an understanding that goes into these things, okay? So, things to remember whenever it comes to, should I discipline my children? I would say this is probably one of the first and foremost things that I would say all across the board. Of course, there's parents that will say, I'm never going to spank my kids. Well, if that's your choice of punishment, okay, that's not a problem. If it's grounding, if it's taking stuff away, physical exertion, whatever the case is, I would say in any of those categories, it boils down to this. Consistency is the expectation. Consistency is the expectation. If a child begins to learn that you are inconsistent, they're going to, for lack of a better phrase, get away with murder. They're going to begin to learn and associate that, well, mom said I was going to get a whipping, or I was going to be put in timeout, or grounded, or this or that, and I did it, and then they never followed through with it. Well, I might as well do it again. That is how the mind of a child works. Even into teenagers, even as adults, we have to admit that consistency is the expectation. In our house, our kids know, relatively, that if mom or dad says something and I defy those things, there's going to be a punishment. There's going to be an equal opportunity result that comes out of it, because we want them to know that it's not optional. That if we say something, it comes as a result. They don't have to know the full result or understanding or stories behind it. But why? As a parent, I want to protect my kids. I want to teach them. I want to show them what it means that if I say no, it is because they may get hurt. Obviously, hey, don't put that paperclip in the outlet. I'm going to tell them no. Why? Because I don't want them to say, as one of my mentors always told me, juice-acuted. I don't want them to get electrocuted because of the result of it. I'm going to tell them no multiple times, if not wear them out, because I don't want them to get hurt in the process. Take the paperclip away, whatever the case. But consistency, there has to be that end result that says, well, I gave you grace, I showed you mercy, but you continued to defy those things. Therefore, this is the punishment that fits the crime, okay? So, consistency needs to be the expectation. Circumstances are everything. If it's something light, of course, kids are going to be kids. They're going to constantly come up to my wife and I, and they're going to say, well, he did this, or she did that, or well, he... And it's like, to a point, that's where I look and I say, okay, everybody's done. Go to your own room. If you cannot get along, we're just going to separate you and be done with that. But now if it eggs on, if it continues, and even in that they defy that, what is going to happen? That punishment is going to gradually increase until they understand, they see it dad or mom's way. That is the result. So circumstances are everything. If my kid just all of a sudden starts wailing on another one, you better believe I'm going to have a higher level of discipline in that moment. Why? Because there's that expectation. You do not hit, you do not punch, you bite, keep your hands to yourself kind of thing, right? There is that level of growth that we have to learn to evaluate as parents that looks and says, even with adult children, there's a line that you do not cross, and this is what happens on the other side, which leads to that third point. Establish clear boundaries. I think that is one of the things that oftentimes shoots parents in the foot all the time, is that we do not understand or establish clear boundaries, that once you cross this line, there is not only going to be a result or a punishment, but that consequence is going to come to fruition. But in their minds, until individuals are 20 or 21, our brains are not fully developed. Kind of generally thinking about that statement, what happens and goes on? Oftentimes, we do not always establish clear boundaries that give parameters, because that is what their minds need. Not only as children, but as teenagers and as adults, young adults, there needs to be those boundaries and those parameters that are clearly established, because if not, they're going to go outside of those boundaries and something is going to happen. Something is going to clearly come as a result of that, okay? And lastly, I would say things to remember would be never let discipline lead to sin. Oftentimes I've heard it. If there's going to be discipline, take a walk beforehand. There again, you've got that kind of boundary between abuse and discipline that comes into play here. If it comes as a result, if you are so mad that your son or your daughter has just wrecked the car and they did it because they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, it probably behoove you to take a walk, to pray about it, to stop and go along and say, okay, God, my flesh is trying to come out. I could beat them within an inch of their life. Obviously, that is probably not the result you want to actually, inflict on the child at that point. But to be able to take a walk, to pray about it, to kind of try to remove yourself in this situation, oftentimes I believe that will make a clear distinction as to what is godly versus what is sinful. As a parent, there again in the Hebrews passage in chapter 12 there, it talks about fathers, parents, we discipline in the moment based on how we feel or what we think is appropriate or right. And there again, sometimes we're going to be a lot more angry and frustrated in the moment than based on the circumstance. But knowing that there is that line and that level of saying what is discipline versus what is abuse, we have to keep those things in mind. So obviously I hope that's not the case for you, but in terms of abuse, but just something I feel I do need to establish. So here's my answer, okay? Is there a biblical response for disciplining your child? I would 100% say yes. You have a biblical mandate to discipline your child, okay? You may not like it, you may not agree with it, because here's what I begin to see, okay? There's a lot of times that this is what parenting looks like in 2025, I guess, right now. And even going back to that previous slide and that last response of never letting, discipline lead to sin. It's that very side of it that today, what is very popular, this idea of gentle parenting of, let me reason or let me talk with my child. Your child can reason and communicate to an extent, but sometimes that's not always going to get through to them, okay? So they're going to continue to exhibit the same behavior. But here is what I mean whenever I say that there is a biblical mandate behind it and this gentle parenting. here's what happens so many times that I've seen. Even whenever you look on Facebook Reels and everything else, you see that parent that does the gentle parenting. They're trying to be patient, and I believe it comes from a good heart. But what happens? They go from 0 to 100 because the boundary keeps getting tested. And they go from trying to gentle parent to where, they just unload on the child. And to me, I believe that is sin. You go from 0 to 100, and then you're the one sitting back with results of saying, I regret my decisions because I went from 0 to 100. Instead of consistently disciplining, instead of getting 0 to 20 and then cutting it off, you go from 0 to 100, and then all of a sudden you're left with these regrets, with these hurts and these pains. To which I would imagine those are going to leave an indelible mark within that child's life. But if there's a gradual punishment that equates to where you only get to 20 miles an hour or 50, going from 0 to 100 is a big difference between 0 to 20 or 50. Being able to consistently come out on those things. And so, am I against gentle parenting? No, but there is a level to which discipline has to come out in a way if the child is continually being obedient, whether that is a child under the age of 10, a teenager, even with adult children. I believe that certain disciplines still, fall or should be enacted within those things. But I would say, as a Christian especially, you have a responsibility to pray to figure out what the discipline looks like. I would say, and that's the beauty of God's grace and mercy. And that, Hebrews 13 establishes, He's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Taking on those promises, taking that hope within your life, I would say, let this be a lesson to you. That if you go to God and you say, God, I need help in this situation, I believe God's going to give you discernment. He's going to give you wisdom. He's going to give you what you need in order to handle the situation rightly. Because here's the result. One day, you and we're going to stand before God. And I believe God is going to use that for parents. I believe that there's a lot of grace and mercy that comes with it. But I also believe there's still accountability. That as a parent, as a teacher, so to speak, to our children, there's going to come that place and time to where we will stand before God and He's going to say, why did you handle these things this way? Why did you do things this way? I believe whenever God says that there should be discipline within the biblical mandate, for us to not follow through or think about what that discipline looks like, I believe that there's going to be condemnation that'll be found and judgment on our side. So I want to encourage you, stop and think about what all this looks like. But as well, I always encourage anybody who's a parent, whenever it comes to these things, it is never too late to try to start reenacting or picking up the pieces of something that is broken, to try to put things back together, to be able to point back towards God's biblical mandate. Whatever that looks like for you, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Even with adult and grown children, there, I believe, needs to be a point of which sometimes lines are drawn in the sand. There is tough love. But either way, it comes to that place to where you're saying, I've got a responsibility. I'm going to be held accountable for how I stand before God one day and what He's going to ask me as it relates to my children. So I hope this kind of gives you an answer to a potential question. Maybe you're struggling with some of these things. There again, like anything else, call me, message me. I'd love to discuss these things. I believe that there is a biblical, command and responsibility that we have, and that's the position that I hold. But I believe too, for those that follow it, there will be a lot of fruit that comes as a result of it. As our Bible verses say, it will bear peaceable fruit in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. But I love you guys. Hope you all have a blessed and wonderful day, and I guess we'll talk to you all later. Thank you guys.